High above the jagged peaks and dense forests of Colorado, where the air is thin and the wind cuts like knives. By day, these towers rise like silent sentinels, offering breathtaking views of valleys and mountains. By night, they are transformed. Shadows cling to the walls. The wind carries whispers of watchers long gone. And the mountains themselves seem alive, groaning beneath the weight of history and unseen presences. Visitors report seeing ghostly figures pacing the platforms, lanterns swinging in the wind though no one is there. Some have felt icy hands brush their shoulders, or heard whispers calling their names from the heights. A few claim to have seen apparitions of past watchmen standing at the railing, eyes glowing, silently observing the world below. Tonight, my dear friend, we will climb these haunted mountain watchtowers. We will ascend the stairs that creak under unseen weight. Peer out across the valleys where shadows gather. And listen to whispers carried on the high-altitude winds. We will uncover the most haunted mountain watchtowers in Colorado, where every plank holds a story, and the past refuses to rest. So tell me, if you were climbing a mountain watchtower at midnight, and a pale figure appeared at the top, staring silently, would you step closer to see who it is? Or would you retreat down the stairs before the shadows notice you? Hello, my dear friend. I am so glad you are here tonight, safe and warm, because the towers we are about to explore are not for the faint of heart. Colorado's mountain watchtowers were built to monitor forests, detect fires, and observe the vast wilderness. Some towers remain in use, while others have long been abandoned, left to the elements and the mountains themselves. Yet in every tower, the echoes of those who once climbed them linger. Some visitors report shadows moving across platforms. Others hear footsteps in stairwells where no one else is present. Lanterns flicker with no source. And a few even claim to have seen ghostly forms moving along the cliffs below. The air at high altitudes is crisp, carrying whispers across valleys and ridges. Some have seen lanterns glowing where no one stands. Others report feeling the presence of unseen watchers, pacing silently beside them as they ascend. Before we climb these haunted mountain watchtowers together, my friend, I want to ask you something. And I hope you will answer in the comments. If you were alone in a tower at midnight, and a shadowy figure appeared silently on the observation deck, would you approach to see who it is? Or would you descend the stairs as quickly as possible, hoping the spirit leaves you alone? Take a deep breath. Steady your heartbeat. And let us explore the most haunted mountain watchtowers in Colorado. Black Ridge Watchtower stands alone on a jagged ridge where stone breaks sharply against open sky. The climb to reach it is narrow and exposed, a winding path carved into rock that drops away on either side. From below, the structure appears skeletal and weathered, its silhouette stark against shifting clouds. By day, it looks abandoned but purposeful, as if still keeping watch over the valleys far beneath it. The tower was built decades ago, intended as a lookout point for fire and weather. Its frame is sturdy despite age, anchored deep into the ridge. The platform at the top offers an uninterrupted view of distant forest and rolling terrain, a place where the wind never seems to rest. During daylight hours, Black Ridge Watchtower feels quiet and exposed. Wind moves freely through open railings and broken slats, producing low tones that echo inside the structure. The stairs creak gently under weight, responding with familiar sounds that match movement. Nothing about the place appears unusual beyond its isolation. As evening approaches, the ridge grows colder. Shadows stretch across the stone, and the sky darkens faster at this elevation. The tower begins to feel taller than it did before, its height emphasized by fading light and deepening space around it. Sound carries farther, then vanishes suddenly, swallowed by open air. Night arrives quickly on the ridge. The surrounding land disappears into darkness, leaving the tower suspended above a sea of shadow. Moonlight outlines the frame and glints off exposed bolts and railings. The stairs descend into darkness below, their curve disappearing into black. It is after nightfall that the most unusual reports begin. Visitors describe seeing figures appear on the upper platform, standing just inside the railing where the view is widest. These figures are upright and still, human in outline but lacking detail. They do not move or gesture. They simply stand, facing outward, as if watching something far below. The figures appear briefly, often when the platform is viewed from a distance. Those climbing the final steps may glimpse a shape above, only to find the platform empty upon arrival. Looking away and back again sometimes brings the figure into view once more, unchanged in position. No faces are visible. No clothing can be distinguished. The figures seem formed from shadow and pale light, blending with the night sky behind them. They do not acknowledge observers and never approach the stairs. Alongside these sightings, footsteps are frequently heard echoing along the staircase. The sound is distinct and unmistakable. Each step lands with solid weight, producing the hollow echo of metal and wood responding to pressure. The rhythm suggests steady movement, neither rushed nor hesitant. These footsteps often begin below, climbing upward at a consistent pace. Visitors report hearing them approach from beneath, one step at a time, following the spiral toward the platform. When turning to look, the stairs remain empty, descending into darkness without movement. At other times, the footsteps travel downward, retreating away from the platform. The sound fades gradually, step by step, until it disappears entirely. No matter the direction, the rhythm remains consistent, as if following a practiced route. The footsteps never overlap with visible movement. When a figure is present on the platform, the stairs remain silent. When footsteps echo, the platform is often empty. The two experiences feel connected, yet never occur together. Those who pause on the stairs often notice the sound responding. Stopping mid-climb causes the footsteps to stop as well, resuming only when movement begins again. The effect creates the unsettling impression of shared pacing, as if something unseen is matching position exactly. Historical records show Blackridge Watchtower was once staffed around the clock. Watchers climbed the stairs regularly, taking shifts at all hours. The platform was rarely empty, especially at night, when visibility was greatest and the need for observation most important. Over time, technology replaced the need for constant presence. The tower was decommissioned, and staff left. Equipment was removed, but the structure remained, deemed too difficult to dismantle safely. Since then, it has stood unused, exposed to wind and weather. Some believe the nighttime activity reflects these long years of routine. The figures on the platform stand where watchers once stood, scanning the horizon. The footsteps echo paths climbed countless times, repeating a pattern that never fully ended. Visitors often describe a strong sense of awareness while inside the tower. The feeling is not fear, but alertness, as though something expects attention. The ridge itself feels watchful, amplifying every sound and movement. Sound behaves unpredictably at this height. Wind carries noise upward and away, then returns it unexpectedly. This makes it difficult to judge distance, yet the footsteps remain clear and localized, always tied to the staircase. Those who remain for extended periods report time feeling compressed. Minutes pass quickly while waiting for movement, then stretch long during silence. The anticipation becomes part of the experience, heightening sensitivity to every creak and shift. As the night deepens, activity tends to lessen. Figures appear less often on the platform. Footsteps become more sporadic, their echoes softer and farther apart. The tower begins to settle, as if concluding its watch. By the hours before dawn, the ridge grows quiet again. Wind remains, but the deliberate sounds fade. The platform stands empty beneath pale light. And the staircase holds no echo beyond natural creaks. At sunrise, Black Ridge Watchtower looks unchanged. The ridge sharpens into view. The stairs show no sign of use. The platform is empty, offering only a sweeping view and cold metal railings. Officials describe the tower as structurally sound but unnecessary to access. There are no warnings about sightings or sounds, only cautions about weather and exposure. Visitors are free to climb, though few choose to do so at night. Those who have stood on the platform after dark often leave with a lasting impression. The image of a figure outlined against the sky. The sound of footsteps climbing unseen. The feeling of being part of a routine that never fully stopped. Black Ridge Watchtower does not feel abandoned in the usual sense. It feels occupied by purpose rather than presence. When night falls, the ridge seems to remember its role, allowing watchers to appear briefly and footsteps to echo along the stairs. By day, the tower is silent and still. By night, it resumes its quiet duty, standing tall against the dark. Listening, watching, and repeating motions shaped long ago, long after the need for them has passed. Widow's Peak Tower rises from a narrow ridge where stone cliffs drop sharply into forest and fog gathers without warning. The structure is tall and slender, built from dark blocks that have weathered decades of wind and rain. From a distance, it looks solitary and quiet, a silhouette against shifting cloud and sky. The tower was once a watch post. Records indicate it was staffed around the clock, its purpose to monitor weather, track movement through the valley, and signal nearby settlements when conditions changed. One watchman worked there alone during the final years of operation, maintaining the routines long after technology made the tower unnecessary. Then, one night, he vanished. No distress signal was sent. No trace was found inside the tower. His belongings remained neatly arranged. The door was closed. The logbook ended mid-entry, dated decades ago. The tower was abandoned soon after, earning its name from the unanswered absence left behind. During the day, Widow's Peak Tower feels exposed. Wind moves freely along the ridge, pressing against stone and steel. Narrow windows frame wide stretches of land below, often obscured by drifting cloud. Sound travels unpredictably, sometimes carrying far, sometimes vanishing entirely. Fog is a constant presence. The fog rolls in quickly from the valley, wrapping the tower in thick layers that erase depth and distance. At times, visibility drops to only a few feet. The world beyond the walls dissolves, leaving the tower isolated in a sea of white. As evening approaches, the atmosphere changes. The fog thickens and clings to the stone, dampening sound and softening light. The interior grows darker, shadows stretching along the curved walls. It is during these hours that movement is first noticed. Figures in uniform appear within the tower. They pace slowly along the interior walkway and near the observation points, following the same routes once used by watchmen. Their shapes are human and clearly defined, yet lacking detail. The uniforms appear simple and dark, consistent in form but indistinct in features. These figures do not interact with one another. They walk alone, stopping briefly at windows, then continuing on. Their pace is steady and deliberate, neither hurried nor hesitant. They do not acknowledge observers. When watched directly, they often fade gradually, blending into shadow and fog. Witnesses describe a sense of routine. The pacing feels purposeful, as though the figures are performing duties long ingrained. They check positions. They move along familiar paths. Their actions suggest vigilance rather than wandering. Alongside the sightings come the sounds. Soft cries drift through the fog, carried by the wind and absorbed by stone. The cries seem to come from outside the tower. They echo faintly against the walls, sometimes circling, sometimes fading completely before returning. Standing near windows often makes the sound clearer, though its source remains hidden within the fog. Researchers have proposed natural explanations. Wind passing through narrow openings can produce tones resembling voices. Temperature shifts along the ridge can carry distant sounds upward. Fog can distort both sight and sound, creating illusions of movement and presence. The patterns repeat regardless of season. Yet these explanations do not fully account for the consistency of reports. Every sound feels amplified. Breathing seems louder. The sense of isolation intensifies, as if the tower exists apart from the surrounding world. Time feels slower, measured by footsteps and drifting cloud rather than minutes. Despite the unsettling nature of the experiences, fear is uncommon. Most visitors report a quiet tension rather than panic. The figures do not approach aggressively. The cries do not escalate. The atmosphere feels solemn, as though shaped by duty and patience rather than distress. Some believe the tower retains the imprint of routine. That decades of watchful pacing, repeated endlessly in isolation, left a pattern embedded in the structure itself. The figures may represent that repetition, continuing without awareness of change or abandonment. Not as a single presence, but as a symbol of the tower's unfinished story. Those who spend the night near Widow's Peak Tower often report vivid dreams. Dreams of standing watch. Of scanning fog for signals that never come. Of listening for sounds that fade before they can be identified. Of scanning fog for signals that never come. Of listening for sounds that fade before they can be identified. Upon waking, many feel tired yet contemplative, as though they have shared a long vigil. As dawn approaches, activity diminishes. The figures appear less frequently, fading more quickly into shadow. Cries grow softer, dissolving into the natural sounds of wind and distant wildlife. Fog begins to thin, revealing the valley below. By morning, the tower is still once more. No movement remains. No sound echoes within the walls. Sunlight reveals only empty walkways, worn steps, and silent windows. The tower stands as it always has, unchanged and unresponsive. Yet those who leave often glance back. The memory of pacing figures and drifting cries lingers, difficult to dismiss. The experience feels less like a haunting and more like an echo of responsibility, preserved by stone and fog. Widow's Peak Tower does not seek attention. It does not warn or threaten. It waits, as it always has, standing watch over land that no longer needs its signals. When fog rolls in and visibility fades, the tower seems to remember its purpose. Within its walls, the rhythm of footsteps and the softness of distant cries suggest that some duties, once assumed, are not easily laid down. And on the ridge above the valley, wrapped in cloud and quiet, Widow's Peak Tower continues its silent vigil, holding on to patterns shaped by time. Isolation, and a watch that never truly ended. Ashen Summit Watchtower stands at the highest point of a long, winding ridge where the land narrows and the air thins. The climb toward it is steady and quiet, bordered by rock and sparse vegetation shaped by constant wind. Even before reaching the top, visibility begins to change. Fog gathers low and dense, settling into the folds of the mountain as though drawn upward by the summit itself. At a distance, the tower appears as a dark silhouette against pale sky. Built of stone and reinforced timber, it rises above the ridge with a simple, utilitarian design. Narrow windows wrap around its upper level, once meant for long-range observation. The structure shows signs of age, but it remains intact, holding its position against weather and time. Fog settles thick at the summit, heavier than anywhere else along the ridge. It drifts in slow waves, obscuring the ground and swallowing sound. Wind that howls along the lower slopes becomes muted here, reduced to a low, steady pressure rather than movement. The summit feels enclosed, isolated from the world below. Approaching the watchtower brings an immediate shift in atmosphere. The air grows noticeably colder, even on mild days. Moisture clings to clothing and skin, and breath becomes visible almost instantly. The fog presses close, limiting sight to only a few steps ahead. Inside the tower, the temperature drops further. Stone walls hold the cold, and the air feels dense and unmoving. Light enters only through narrow windows, diffused by fog that refuses to thin. Shadows stretch across the interior in soft layers, shifting subtly even when no one moves. It is within these shadows that figures begin to appear. They stand near the walls or between the support beams, partially formed and indistinct. Their outlines suggest human shape, but details never settle into clarity. They do not move abruptly. Instead, they seem to emerge gradually, as if separating from the fog itself. These figures remain inside the tower, never stepping beyond its walls. Some appear closer to the windows, facing outward. Others linger deeper within the structure, positioned where light barely reaches. They do not interact with one another. They simply exist, quiet and still. Visitors often notice the sensation of touch before fully registering the figures. An icy brush passes across a shoulder. Fingers graze the back of the neck or upper arm. The contact is brief but unmistakable, cold enough to cause an involuntary shiver. It does not feel accidental, nor does it linger long enough to provoke panic. Turning reveals nothing behind. The fog drifts lazily through the open doorway. The figures remain where they are, unchanged and silent. Yet the certainty of touch remains, leaving behind a lingering chill that spreads slowly before fading. As visitors move within the tower, the figures seem to adjust their positions subtly. A shape that stood near one wall appears farther back moments later. Another becomes more defined before thinning again. The movement is minimal, easy to miss, but consistent enough to be noticed over time. Sound behaves strangely at Ashen Summit. Footsteps echo softly, then disappear. Voices feel absorbed by the stone, losing strength almost immediately. Even small movements seem louder than expected, intrusive against the otherwise complete quiet. The watchtower was constructed decades ago as a lookout point, used to monitor weather patterns and distant routes. Records indicate that it was staffed intermittently, often during harsh conditions when visibility was poor. Eventually, its purpose faded, and it was left unoccupied, standing watch without watchers. Some believe the figures reflect that long period of vigilance. Forms remaining where people once stood. Presence lingering in a place built for observation and waiting. The fog, constant and heavy, seems to preserve this sense of pause. As time passes inside the tower, the sensation of icy hands becomes more frequent. A brush against the shoulder while stepping past a beam. A light touch at the upper back near the doorway. The contact never escalates. It feels careful, measured, almost restrained. Despite the unsettling nature of the experience, fear rarely becomes overwhelming. The atmosphere feels controlled rather than chaotic. The figures do not advance. The touches do not grip. The fog does not surge or trap. Everything moves within quiet limits. Those who stand still notice that the activity slows. The figures appear less distinct. The sensation of touch fades. The tower feels balanced, as if responding to stillness with restraint. When movement resumes, the experience returns gently. Figures become clearer once more. The cold brushes pass again. The tower seems attentive, not reactive, acknowledging presence without interference. Attempts to document the phenomena have yielded little clarity. Photographs capture fog-filled interiors and vague shapes that defy focus. Video footage shows shadows shifting without clear cause. Temperature readings confirm sudden cold spots near walls and windows. But no consistent pattern. Scientific explanations suggest altitude, moisture, and temperature inversion contribute to sensory distortion. Low visibility and isolation amplify perception. These factors account for pieces of the experience, but not its coherence or timing. As fog thickens further, the summit becomes almost completely enclosed. Windows show nothing but pale gray. The outside world feels distant, unreal. Eventually, those who choose to leave notice a gradual easing as they descend. The fog thins. The cold lessens. Sound returns to normal. Looking back, the watchtower fades into mist. Its outline dissolving until nothing remains but ridge and sky. Those who remain until fog begins to lift experience a quiet conclusion. The figures thin and vanish without transition. The sensation of touch stops. The interior of the tower returns to empty stone and shadow. By daylight, Ashen Summit Watchtower appears abandoned and ordinary. Fog lingers in pockets, but visibility improves. No trace remains of the figures or the cold touches. Yet visitors who have stood inside during heavy fog remember the experience clearly. The presence within the tower. The icy brush against the shoulder. The feeling of being observed in a place built to observe others. Ashen Summit Watchtower remains open to those willing to climb. It offers wide views on clear days and silence when clouds settle low. And when fog gathers thick at the summit, the tower sometimes remembers its purpose. Allowing shapes to appear once more inside its walls. And cold hands to brush past. Reminding visitors that some places continue to watch. Even when no one is meant to be there. Hollow Mountain Tower stands alone atop a steep cliff where the land drops away into a wide valley below. The ascent to the tower is narrow and winding, carved directly into stone that shows signs of age and erosion. From a distance, the structure appears solid and purposeful, its dark silhouette rising against the sky as if anchored to the mountain itself. The higher one climbs, the quieter the world becomes, until only wind and breath remain. The tower was built generations ago, though records offer little clarity on its original purpose. Some suggest it served as a lookout, others as a signal point guiding travelers through the mountain pass. Whatever its function, the builders chose a precarious location. The cliff edge falls sharply away on all sides, leaving the tower exposed. Even during the day, the air around it feels thin and unsettled. The structure itself is circular, built of heavy stone blocks fitted tightly together. A narrow walkway wraps around the exterior, bordered by a low railing that follows the curve of the tower. As daylight fades, Hollow Mountain Tower begins to change. Shadows gather quickly along the cliff face, climbing upward as the sun lowers behind distant peaks. Wind strengthens, moving in irregular bursts that cause the tower to creak softly. The railing grows cold to the touch, and the stone beneath feels less stable, as though the mountain itself is shifting beneath the structure. It is during this transition that figures are first noticed. They appear along the railings, standing just beyond the curve of the walkway. Pale shapes, upright and still, facing outward toward the valley below. At first, they resemble other visitors pausing to take in the view. Only after a moment does their stillness become unsettling. They do not move with the wind. They do not adjust their stance. They simply stand, silent and unmoving. Witnesses report that the figures never approach. They remain fixed in place, evenly spaced along the railing, their outlines softened by shadow and fading light. Looking directly at them causes their edges to blur, as if the eye cannot quite settle on their form. Turning away, even briefly, often results in their disappearance. Lanterns soon begin to move. Hanging from iron hooks along the walkway, old lanterns sway gently back and forth. There is no visible flame inside them, yet they glow with a warm, steady light. The motion is deliberate, rhythmic, not entirely aligned with the wind. Some lanterns swing when the air is still. Others remain motionless during gusts. Visitors often pause to watch, expecting to see someone nearby tending to them. No one ever appears. The lanterns continue their slow arc, casting moving shadows across stone and railing. Light pools briefly at the feet of the figures, then slides away, leaving them half illuminated and half lost to darkness. Lanterns swing wider. Shadows stretch and twist along the tower walls. Sound behaves strangely, carrying whispers that do not belong to the wind alone. Those who circle the walkway often feel the sensation of being accompanied. Footsteps echo behind them, matching their pace, stopping when they stop. Turning reveals empty stone and swinging lanterns. The figures along the railing remain silent, never acknowledging movement or sound. Historical accounts of Hollow Mountain Tower are fragmented. Old maps mark its location but offer no detail beyond its outline. Some records mention caretakers assigned to maintain the structure, though no names are listed. Others reference signal lights that once burned through the night, guiding travelers across the valley. At some point, the signals stopped, yet the tower remained. Local belief suggests the tower never fully ceased its function. According to long-held stories, it continues to watch rather than signal. Its presence oriented outward rather than inward. The figures along the railing are said to be watchers, bound to the edge. Where land gives way to open space. Visitors who stay too long often report a growing sense of vertigo, not from height alone, but from the feeling of being pulled toward the railing. The valley below seems closer than it should be, the drop more inviting than threatening. Those who step back instinctively often describe a sudden clarity, as if resisting the urge restores balance. One visitor described standing near a lantern as it swung gently beside him. The light revealed a figure only a few steps away, hands resting on the railing, face turned toward the darkness below. The figure did not move, yet the visitor felt noticed. When the lantern swung back, the figure was gone, leaving only the sound of wind rushing upward from the cliff. Another account tells of a group who climbed the tower at dusk. As night settled, lanterns lit one by one. And figures appeared along the walkway. The group felt no immediate fear, only a pressing awareness that the tower was no longer empty. They descended quietly, leaving the lanterns swinging behind them. As night deepens, the mountain grows louder. Wind howls through unseen channels, echoing against stone. Lantern light flickers against the tower walls, though the glow itself never fades. The figures remain until attention drifts, then vanish without movement, as if they were never fully present to begin with. By dawn, Hollow Mountain Tower returns to stillness. Lanterns hang motionless. The walkway stands empty. The railing shows no trace of where figures stood hours earlier. The valley below, calm and distant. The tower appears unchanged, solid and silent against the sky. Those who leave at sunrise often carry a lingering sensation. Not fear, but awareness. The understanding that the tower does not simply occupy the mountain. It participates in it. It responds to light, wind, and attention. Hollow Mountain Tower remains where it has always stood, balanced between earth and open air. Built atop a steep cliff, it watches the valley below as it always has. When night falls and lanterns swing without hands, figures appear briefly along the railings, silent and still. The tower does not call out. It does not warn. It simply observes, holding its place against wind and shadow, waiting for the moment when light fades and the mountain listens back. Bloodstone Watchtower rises from a ridge of dark rock where the land narrows and climbs sharply toward the sky. The stone beneath it carries a reddish hue, deepened by age and weather, giving the structure its name long before any stories took hold. By day, the watchtower appears silent and scarred, its outer walls blackened in places, marked by a past that never fully faded. The tower was built as a lookout, positioned to scan wide stretches of forest and valley below. A narrow stairwell spirals upward inside, enclosed by thick stone meant to withstand wind and heat. Time has worn the steps smooth, and the air inside remains cool even under strong sunlight. From the outside, the tower looks stable, but close inspection reveals cracks sealed long ago, evidence of damage carefully repaired. Historical records confirm that Bloodstone Watchtower was the site of a tragic fire many years ago. The blaze began during a night shift, spreading rapidly through the interior before help could reach the ridge. The fire was eventually contained, but the loss left a permanent mark on the structure and on those who lived nearby. Afterward, the tower was abandoned, deemed unsafe for regular use. During daylight hours, visitors often describe the watchtower as heavy with stillness. Sound feels muted within its walls, and even footsteps seem to fade quickly. The stairwell carries a faint scent of ash, noticeable only in quiet moments. Nothing moves. Nothing stirs. The tower feels empty, yet attentive, as if holding its breath. As evening approaches, the temperature drops quickly at this elevation. Shadows deepen along the ridge, and the sky darkens earlier than in the valleys below. Inside the tower, the stairwell grows dim, its curves swallowing light. Wind begins to move through narrow openings, producing low tones that echo faintly upward. Nightfall transforms Bloodstone Watchtower. The surrounding landscape disappears into darkness, leaving the structure isolated against the sky. Moonlight touches only the upper edges of stone, while the interior remains mostly black. The stairwell becomes a vertical tunnel of shadow, its depth difficult to judge. It is after full darkness that visitors report the most unsettling experiences. Figures are said to rise slowly from the stairwell, emerging step by step without sound. Their forms assembling gradually as they ascend. They do not rush or stumble. Their movement is deliberate and restrained. The figures never reach the top platform fully. They rise to a certain height, pause briefly, then fade back into the darkness below. No clear features are visible. Their presence is defined by motion rather than detail. As if the act of rising is more important than arrival. The figures never rush or stumble. Their movement is deliberate and restrained. The figure's presence is defined by motion rather than detail. As if the act of rising is more important than arrival. Their movement is deliberate and restrained. The figures never rush or stumble. Their presence is defined by motion rather than detail. As if the act of rising is more important than arrival. The figures do not rush or stumble. Their movement is deliberate and restrained. The figure's presence is defined by motion rather than detail. As if the act of rising is more important than arrival. Witnesses often describe a sudden stillness when this occurs. Wind quiets and ambient sound fades. The tower seems to focus inward, centering attention on the stairwell. The moment feels contained, isolated from the surrounding night. Alongside these appearances, faint whispers are frequently reported. The sound is soft and close, forming near the listener rather than traveling through space. It does not echo or carry like normal speech. Instead, it feels as though it emerges from within the stone itself. The whispers speak names. Not shouted or pleaded, but spoken clearly and calmly. Visitors report hearing their own names, pronounced correctly, even when they are alone and have shared no information with anyone. The tone is neutral, neither inviting nor threatening. Those who respond often report an immediate intensification of the experience. The whispers never grow loud. They remain faint, just above the edge of hearing, requiring focus to perceive. When ignored, they tend to fade gradually, replaced by the natural sounds of wind and distant movement. When acknowledged, they linger longer. Historical context offers partial insight. During the fire, voices were reportedly heard calling from within the tower, guiding responders through smoke and darkness. Names were spoken repeatedly as people attempted to locate one another. These accounts were recorded but never fully explained. Some believe the whispers echo those final moments, repeating patterns of communication tied to urgency and confusion. Others suggest the tower itself absorbed the sound, releasing fragments under specific conditions. No theory accounts for why names of modern visitors are heard. The stairwell plays a central role in these experiences. It is where the fire spread most quickly and where damage was most severe. Even now, the stone retains darker discoloration in its depths. The air feels heavier there, as if shaped by memory rather than structure. Visitors who linger describe a sensation of being recognized. Not watched, but acknowledged. The tower seems aware of presence, responding subtly through sound and movement. This awareness feels selective, engaging only when darkness settles fully. As the night progresses, activity becomes less frequent. Figures rise fewer times. Whispers soften, spacing farther apart. The tower slowly returns to quiet, though the sense of weight remains until departure. Those who leave before dawn often describe a sudden release once they descend the ridge. The air feels lighter. Sound returns to normal. The sense of attention fades with distance, as if an unseen boundary has been crossed. By morning, Bloodstone Watchtower appears unchanged. Sunlight reveals scorched stone and repaired walls. The stairwell is empty, silent. No sign remains of movement or sound from the night before. Officials acknowledge the fire as part of the site's history but discourage speculation beyond documented facts. There are no warnings posted about figures or whispers, only signs noting unstable footing and exposure to weather. Access is permitted, though rarely encouraged. Those who have experienced the tower at night often carry a lasting impression. The image of figures rising without sound. The unmistakable clarity of a whispered name. The feeling that the tower remembers voices and knows how to use them. Bloodstone Watchtower does not present itself as dangerous or inviting. It feels preserved in a moment that never fully ended. When darkness falls, fragments of that moment surface quietly, allowing movement and sound to repeat without explanation. By day, the tower stands silent against the ridge. By night, it listens, releases, and then settles again. The stairwell waits. The stone holds its memory. And the whispers remain just faint enough to be heard only by those who stand close enough to listen. Ironclad Tower stands on a windswept rise where the ground turns rocky and vegetation thins to scattered brush. Its frame is constructed almost entirely of iron, darkened by age and exposure, rising in stacked platforms connected by narrow staircases. From a distance, the tower appears rigid and immovable, a vertical line against open sky. The structure was built for function, not comfort. Historical records suggest it served as an industrial observation and relay point, used to oversee surrounding operations and monitor distant activity. Workers once climbed its staircases daily, carrying tools, messages, and responsibility upward through its levels. When those operations ended, the tower was left behind, too costly to dismantle and too remote to repurpose. The iron staircases remain intact. They spiral and zigzag between platforms, their steps worn smooth by countless boots. Rust flakes away in thin layers, crunching softly underfoot. Railings are cold to the touch, even in direct sunlight, and vibrate faintly when the wind presses against the tower's frame. During the day, ironclad tower feels exposed. Wind moves freely through the open structure, whistling between beams and across grated floors. Sound carries easily upward, then vanishes just as quickly. Looking down from the higher platforms reveals long stretches of land, quiet and distant, emphasizing the tower's isolation. The interior spaces are minimal. There are no enclosed rooms, only landings and platforms stacked vertically. Each level offers a slightly different perspective, yet all feel similarly restrained. Movement is deliberate here. Every step produces sound. Every pause feels noticeable. As the light begins to fade, the atmosphere changes. Shadows stretch across the iron framework, breaking the tower into overlapping shapes. The metal darkens, absorbing the last warmth of the day. Wind grows steadier, pressing against the structure with low, constant force. It is during these hours that figures are first seen. They appear on the platforms above or below, pacing slowly along the edges. Their forms are human in outline but lack detail, defined more by contrast than light. They move silently, their feet never striking the metal grates with sound. The figures follow the platforms precisely. They walk measured paths, stopping near railings, then turning back the way they came. Their pace is steady and unhurried, suggesting routine rather than exploration. They do not look outward. They do not acknowledge observers sharing the tower. When approached, the figures fade. They do not disappear suddenly. Instead, they thin and dissolve into shadow, blending with the iron beams and empty space. Moments later, the platform appears entirely vacant, as if no one had been there at all. The figures pace the same routes repeatedly, favoring certain levels over others. These patterns mirror the design of the tower itself, as though movement is guided by structure rather than choice. Alongside the sightings come the sounds. Footsteps echo behind visitors, clear and deliberate. They match human cadence precisely, neither rushed nor uneven. The sound travels along the staircases and platforms, following closely enough to be unmistakable. Then, without warning, the sound stops. These echoes feel different from natural noise. Wind can rattle metal and cause vibration, but the footsteps have weight and rhythm. Researchers studying the tower point to acoustic properties. Iron structures amplify and carry sound efficiently. Temperature changes can cause metal to contract and expand, producing sharp noises. Wind pressure can create rhythmic vibration. Visitors often describe a sensation accompanying the sound. A feeling of someone moving close behind them, matching their pace. The sensation fades when the footsteps stop, returning when they resume. The feeling is strongest on staircases, where space narrows and sound reflects sharply. Despite the intensity of the experience, fear is uncommon. Most describe alertness rather than panic. The figures do not approach aggressively. The footsteps do not chase. The tower feels active, not hostile. As if movement continues without intent to disturb. Some believe the tower holds residual routine. Years of workers pacing platforms, climbing stairs, and maintaining vigilance may have left an imprint. The figures may reflect repetition embedded into the structure itself, replaying familiar motions long after purpose ended. Others believe the iron plays a role. Metal retains vibration and resonance. The constant stress of wind and temperature may activate subtle feedback within the structure, creating patterns of sound and shadow that mimic human presence. Those who remain on the tower after nightfall often report heightened awareness. Every movement feels amplified. Breathing sounds louder. The vast openness around the structure contrasts sharply with the confined paths of the platforms. As night deepens, activity diminishes. The figures appear less frequently, fading more quickly into darkness. The footsteps grow softer and more distant, eventually blending with the ambient sounds of wind moving through iron. By early morning, the tower returns to stillness. Sunlight reveals empty platforms and silent staircases. No movement remains. No sound follows visitors. The iron stands unchanged, weathered but stable. Yet the memory lingers. Those who leave ironclad tower often glance upward one last time, half expecting movement along the rails. The experience stays with them, not as fear, but as a reminder of how spaces shaped by repetition can continue to move long after their purpose has faded. Within its iron frame, footsteps still seem to travel, and figures still appear to pace, not because something remains trapped there, but because the tower remembers how it was meant to be used. And so it stands, quietly repeating motion without intent, holding the echo of movement in its staircases, and allowing visitors to briefly step into a rhythm that never truly ended. Mistvale Tower rises from the summit of a narrow mountain ridge where the air is thin and the land falls away on all sides. Fog drifts across the summit with little warning. It rolls in gently, pooling along the ground before lifting to surround the tower in pale layers. The fog here is persistent, rarely dispersing fully, and it softens every edge of stone and sky. Sound fades quickly within it, leaving only muffled footsteps and slow breathing. The tower itself is built of aged stone, its surface worn smooth by wind and moisture. As fog thickens around the summit, movement begins to appear within it. Figures emerge at a distance, barely distinguishable from the drifting mist. They take shape gradually, forming upright outlines that resemble people standing still or walking slowly along the ridge. These figures do not approach directly. They remain scattered across the summit, appearing and fading as the fog shifts. Some seem to pause near the tower walls. Others move along the outer edges of visibility, always just far enough away to remain uncertain. When watched closely, they thin and dissolve, only to reappear moments later in a different position. Visitors often notice a change in atmosphere before fully seeing the figures. The air feels heavier, colder, as though the fog carries weight. Breath becomes shallow without conscious effort. The summit feels smaller, enclosed by mist that presses inward rather than drifting freely. As daylight fades, another detail becomes apparent. They appear faint at first, barely noticeable against the fog-filled interior. As darkness deepens, the lights grow clearer, positioned where eyes would be if someone stood just behind the glass. They do not flicker or move quickly. They remain steady, watching outward from the tower's upper level. When fog thickens, the lights dim. When it thins, they return, unwavering and calm. Those who move closer to the tower feel an immediate shift. The temperature drops sharply near the entrance. Stone walls radiate cold, and moisture clings to clothing. Inside, visibility is limited to a few feet, the fog slipping through openings and settling into corners. The figures outside remain visible through windows at irregular intervals, drifting past like silent observers. The pale eyes continue to glow within, creating the unsettling impression of presence both inside and out, layered within the fog. Despite the intensity of the experience, fear rarely arrives suddenly. The atmosphere feels restrained, controlled. The figures do not rush. The lights do not flare. Everything moves at a slow, deliberate pace, as if governed by rules unseen but strictly followed. Mistvale Tower was constructed during a time when observation meant safety. Those stationed here watched weather fronts and distant movement, often spending long hours alone in cloud and silence. Records indicate that fog frequently disrupted visibility, forcing watchers to rely on sound and intuition rather than sight. Some believe the phenomena seen today reflect that history. Figures forming where watchers once stood. Eyes glowing from windows long used to scan the horizon. Presence lingering in a place shaped by attention and waiting. Visitors who remain still inside the tower notice subtle changes. The pale eyes dim slightly. The figures outside slow or pause. The fog settles into a steady layer. The summit feels balanced, as though responding to stillness with calm. When movement resumes, the activity returns gently. The figures drift again. The lights brighten faintly. The fog curls and shifts, maintaining its quiet enclosure. Attempts to document the experience have yielded limited results. Photographs show fog and dark openings where windows should be. Occasionally, faint points of light appear in images, but they lack clarity. Video footage captures shifting mist without clear forms. Audio recordings reveal only wind and distant ambient noise. Environmental explanations cite temperature inversion, moisture density, and altitude as factors that distort perception. These explanations address the fog and light conditions, but not the coordination between figures and glowing eyes. As night reaches its deepest hours, the summit becomes nearly featureless. Fog blankets everything in pale gray. The figures appear closer together now, though still indistinct. The pale eyes remain visible, steady and unblinking, until they begin to fade one by one. Gradually, the lights dim completely. The figures thin and dissolve back into fog. The summit grows quiet again, holding only stone, mist, and silence. Those who descend before dawn often notice the fog thinning as they lose elevation. Sound returns. The air warms slightly. Looking back, the tower becomes a vague silhouette, then disappears entirely into cloud. By morning, Mistvale Tower appears unchanged. Fog lingers in pockets, but visibility improves. Yet visitors who witnessed the summit at night remember it clearly. The shapes forming in mist. The pale eyes watching from the tower windows. The feeling of being observed in a place built to observe others. Mistvale Tower remains open to those willing to climb. On clear days, it offers wide views and open sky. On fog-filled nights, it becomes something else entirely. When mist drifts across the summit and the world narrows to stone and cloud, the tower sometimes remembers its purpose. Figures appear once more in the fog, and pale eyes glow quietly from the windows. Watching a horizon that no longer exists. Shadow Peak Watchtower rises higher than any other structure in the mountain range, a solitary stone silhouette set against open sky. Built on the highest ridge, it commands a view that stretches across valleys, forests, and distant peaks fading into haze. The climb to the tower is long and demanding, following a narrow trail that winds upward through thinning air and exposed rock. The watchtower was constructed generations ago, though its original purpose is unclear. Some records suggest it served as an early warning post. Others claim it marked a boundary or signal point. What is certain is that its builders chose height over comfort. The wind here is constant, shifting direction without warning, carrying the scent of stone and cold air. Sound travels strangely, sometimes echoing far, sometimes disappearing entirely. As visitors climb, the feeling of being alone rarely lasts. Many describe a subtle awareness of something behind them, close but unseen. Footsteps seem to follow at a careful distance, stopping when the climber stops, resuming when movement begins again. Turning around reveals nothing but the winding path and steep drop below, yet the sensation remains, steady and patient. The higher the trail rises, the stronger the feeling becomes. Breathing grows heavier, not just from altitude, but from tension that builds without explanation. Some climbers report the urge to hurry, while others feel compelled to slow down, as though matching an unseen pace. The mountain feels attentive, responding to movement rather than resisting it. The watchtower itself stands at the summit, its stone walls weathered but intact. A narrow doorway opens into a spiral staircase that leads upward through the structure. Climbing the interior staircase often intensifies the sense of presence. Each step echoes softly, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the thick stone. Visitors describe the distinct feeling of someone ascending just behind them, close enough to feel but never close enough to touch. The sensation is not aggressive. It feels observant, measured, as if something is ensuring the climb continues. Those who stop for too long often report a sudden discomfort, an urge to keep moving. At the top of the tower, a wide balcony wraps around the structure, protected by a low stone wall. From here, the landscape opens fully, revealing the scale of the surrounding mountains. It is here that figures are most often seen. They appear pacing slowly along the balcony, their movement steady and deliberate. The figures follow the curve of the stone wall, walking the perimeter as if on routine patrol. Witnesses often first mistake the figures for other visitors. Only after watching for several moments does something feel wrong. The figures never look outward at the view. They keep their gaze fixed ahead, focused on the path beneath their feet. Their movement produces no sound, even on stone. Looking directly at the figures can be difficult. Their outlines blur slightly, as if the eye struggles to focus. Turning away for even a moment often results in their disappearance. When attention returns to the same spot, the balcony is empty, save for wind and shadow. The presence felt during the climb often intensifies on the balcony. Visitors describe standing near the stone wall and feeling as though someone has stepped just behind them. The sensation is unmistakable, a shift in air, a subtle pressure at the back of the neck. Turning quickly reveals only open space and sweeping views, yet the feeling lingers. Some report hearing quiet movement nearby, the sound of footsteps matching their own pace along the balcony. Others hear faint murmurs carried by the wind, too indistinct to form words, yet consistent enough to suggest intent. The sounds seem tied to motion, growing clearer when walking and fading when standing still. Historical accounts of Shadow Peak Watchtower are sparse and fragmented. Old maps show its location clearly, yet written descriptions offer little detail. Some mention long-term watchkeepers stationed there for years at a time, responsible for observing weather, movement, and light across the range. Few names are recorded. Fewer departures are noted. Local belief holds that the watchtower never stopped watching, even after it was abandoned. According to these stories, routine outlasted purpose. The pacing figures are not intruders, but remnants of vigilance, continuing a pattern etched into the stone by repetition in time. Visitors who remain on the balcony too long often describe a sense of distortion. Time feels stretched. The wind grows louder, filling the space between thoughts. The valley below pulling attention downward. Those who step back instinctively often feel relief, as though re-establishing balance. One visitor described leaning against the stone wall while watching clouds pass beneath the tower. A figure appeared several steps away, pacing slowly, never acknowledging his presence. As the figure passed behind a stone pillar, it vanished completely, leaving only the sound of wind where movement had been moments earlier. Another account tells of a climber who felt accompanied from the base of the trail to the summit. On the balcony, he sensed the presence move past him, then continue pacing along the wall. The feeling behind him faded only when he began his descent. As night approaches, conditions at Shadow Peak Watchtower grow more intense. Wind strengthens. Light fades quickly. Shadows lengthen across the balcony, making movement harder to track. Figures appear more frequently at dusk, though they remain silent and distant. By morning, the watchtower returns to stillness. The balcony stands empty. The staircase echoes only with the sound of footsteps belonging to those who climb it. The sense of presence fades gradually as visitors descend, lifting completely only when the trail drops below the ridge. Shadow Peak Watchtower remains the highest point in the range, exposed to sky and silence. It does not announce itself as haunted. It does not seek attention. It simply continues its role, elevated and observant. Those who climb it carry away more than memories of the view. They remember the feeling of being followed without threat, watched without judgment. A reminder that some places are shaped not just by stone and height, but by the act of watching itself. Shadow Peak Watchtower stands where it always has, pacing the edge of the world with figures only briefly seen, holding its position above the mountains, waiting patiently for the next set of footsteps to climb toward it. Deadman's cliff tower rises from the edge of a massive stone precipice, where the land breaks away into open air and distant valleys disappear beneath drifting mist. The tower clings to the cliff as if anchored by necessity rather than design, its structure weathered by decades of wind and salt carried up from below. The path leading to the tower is narrow and uneven, carved directly into the rock. Each step brings the sound of wind rushing upward through the cliff face. The structure itself is built from dark stone, reinforced with iron supports that show signs of age. Wooden platforms extend from different levels, once used for observation and signaling, now empty and worn smooth. During daylight, the tower feels quiet but uneasy. The stairs creak underfoot, responding with hollow echoes that travel farther than expected. Looking down from the platforms reveals sheer drops and rolling fog that never fully clears. The cliffs carry sound unpredictably, returning echoes that seem delayed or misplaced. As evening approaches, the air grows colder and heavier. Shadows stretch across the stairs, pooling in corners and along the inner walls. The cliffs darken quickly, swallowing the horizon as the sky fades. The tower feels taller at this hour, its height emphasized by the growing darkness below. Night arrives abruptly along the cliffs. Wind strengthens, flowing upward and around the tower in steady currents. The platforms vanish into shadow except where moonlight catches their edges. The stairs become a vertical corridor of darkness, their spiral difficult to follow without light. It is after full nightfall that figures begin to appear. Visitors report seeing shapes standing on the stairs, partially illuminated by moonlight filtering through narrow openings. These figures resemble people paused mid-climb, their outlines clear but their details absent. Visitors report seeing these shapes. They do not move quickly. Instead, they appear one at a time, standing still as if waiting. When approached, they fade slowly, dissolving into shadow rather than stepping aside. At times, a figure appears higher on the stairs, only to be gone moments later when reached. The figures never speak. They do not gesture or react. Their presence feels restrained, as though bound to specific points along the stairwell. Some appear facing upward, others downward, all maintaining the sense of movement frozen in place. Lantern light is another frequent sight within Deadman's cliff tower. On abandoned platforms, faint glows flicker where lanterns once hung. The light sways gently, responding to no visible wind. It illuminates nothing beyond itself, casting no real shadows. These lanterns appear intermittently. One platform may glow briefly before going dark, while another lights up farther along the cliff face. No flame can be found, no glass or metal frame visible when inspected. The glow exists independently, then fades without warning. The platforms themselves feel suspended between past and present. When lantern light appears, the space feels briefly occupied, then returns to emptiness. Across the cliffs, sound carries in unsettling ways. Visitors hear distant cries echoing through the open air, rising from far below or across unseen ridges. The cries are faint and drawn out, shaped by wind and distance, making direction difficult to determine. These sounds do not repeat in patterns. One cry may linger, then silence stretches for several minutes before another emerges. The tone suggests calling rather than warning, neither frantic nor calm, simply present and unresolved. Those who hear the cries often describe a tightening sensation in the chest, an instinctive response to sound that feels human yet unreachable. Shouting back produces no reply. The cliffs absorb voices, scattering them into fragments that never return intact. Historical records suggest Deadman's Cliff Tower served multiple roles over time. It functioned as a lookout, a signal station, and a warning post during periods of heavy travel through the region. The cliffs were dangerous, and cries once carried real meaning, signaling distress or danger below. Records mention falls, storms, and failed rescues. Lanterns were used to guide movement at night, and voices often echoed across the cliffs during emergencies. Eventually, the tower was abandoned, deemed too exposed and difficult to maintain. Some believe the nighttime activity reflects these moments of urgency. Figures on the stairs echo those who climbed in haste. Lanterns flicker where guidance was once essential. Cries across the cliffs repeat sounds that once demanded immediate response. Visitors often report feeling observed while inside the tower. Not watched directly, but acknowledged by the space itself. The stairs feel expectant. The platforms feel occupied even when empty. The air seems to hold attention. Time behaves strangely within the tower at night. Moments of silence feel extended, while periods of activity pass quickly. The repetition of figures, light, and sound creates a rhythm that draws focus inward, away from the outside world. Those who pause on the stairs often notice the environment responding. Wind shifts subtly. Sounds change direction. The tower seems sensitive to presence, reacting through echo and absence rather than direct interaction. As the night deepens, activity gradually slows. Figures appear less often. Lantern light flickers briefly, then stops. The cries across the cliffs become more distant, stretched thin by wind and space. By the hours before dawn, Deadman's Cliff Tower returns to near stillness. The wind remains, but the deliberate sounds fade. The stairs hold only natural echoes. The platforms stand dark and empty once more. At sunrise, the tower looks unchanged. Stone walls catch pale light. The cliffs sharpen into view. No trace remains of figures or lanterns. The air feels ordinary again, though the memory of the night lingers. Officials describe the tower as structurally unstable and discourage nighttime visits due to weather and terrain. There are no warnings about sightings or sounds, only notices about safety and exposure. Access remains possible, though rarely recommended. Those who have stood within Deadman's Cliff Tower after dark often carry a lasting impression. The image of a figure on the stairs. The quiet glow of lantern light where none should exist. The distant cries carried across endless stone. Deadman's Cliff Tower does not feel hostile, but it does not feel empty. It stands at a boundary between land and open air, where sound and memory travel freely. When night falls, the tower seems to remember its purpose, allowing movement, light, and voice to return briefly before the day erases them again. By day, it is silent stone on a cliff. By night, it becomes something layered and attentive, repeating fragments of motion and sound shaped by height, history, and the vast space below. Hollow Oak Watchtower stands on a narrow ridge overlooking a wide valley, where the land drops away into rolling fields and distant forest. The tower itself is modest in height, built of stone and timber, weathered smooth by decades of wind and rain. It was never meant to dominate the landscape, only to observe it. What surrounds the tower, however, gives it a presence that feels far larger than its structure. Old oak trees line the ridge in uneven rows. Their trunks are thick and twisted, rising from the rocky ground with deep scars and heavy roots exposed by erosion. Branches stretch outward and upward, intertwining above the ridge to form a broken canopy that filters light into shifting patterns. These oaks are older than the watchtower itself, having stood here long before the first stone was set in place. During the day, the watchtower appears calm. Sunlight moves slowly across the ridge, illuminating bark, stone, and grass in soft tones. The valley below lies open and quiet, wind moving through tall grasses in visible waves. From the tower, the view feels expansive and peaceful, offering little hint of what the area becomes as daylight fades. Sound travels easily here. A voice can carry far across the valley, yet footsteps near the tower feel oddly muted. The oaks absorb and redirect noise, creating pockets of quiet followed by sudden clarity. Even in still air, the ridge feels attentive, as though listening. As afternoon gives way to evening, the atmosphere begins to change. Shadows lengthen beneath the oaks, stretching farther than expected and lingering longer than the sun's position would suggest. The spaces between trees darken unevenly, forming shapes that seem to shift independently of the branches above them. It is among these trees that the shadows begin to twist. They bend and curl along the ground and trunks, moving in slow, fluid motions that do not align with the fading light. A shadow may stretch sideways, then contract, or slide behind a tree only to reappear in a different shape moments later. When watched closely, the movement often slows or stops, blending back into stillness. Visitors describe the sensation as disorienting rather than frightening. The shadows do not rush or surround. They drift, reshape, and reposition, as though responding to something unseen. The effect is strongest along the ridge line, where the oaks stand closest together and the ground slopes unevenly. As dusk deepens, the valley grows quieter. Wind softens. Insects settle. The vast space below the ridge becomes a darkened expanse, broken only by faint outlines of land and sky. It is in this growing stillness that a new sound emerges. Faint drumbeats echo across the valley. The rhythm is slow and steady, spaced evenly with long pauses between each beat. The sound is low and resonant, more felt than heard at first, as if traveling through the ground before reaching the air. It carries upward toward the ridge, passing through the oaks and around the watchtower. At times, it feels closer. At others, distant and nearly lost. The rhythm, however, never changes. Those who follow the sound find nothing. The valley remains empty. No instruments are visible. No movement accompanies the beats. The sound continues regardless of attention. Then fades gradually as night settles more fully. Researchers have suggested natural explanations. Low-frequency sounds can travel great distances, especially in cooling evening air. Wind moving across uneven terrain can create rhythmic vibrations. Even distant activity can echo in ways that resemble percussion. Yet these explanations do not fully satisfy those who experience the phenomenon repeatedly. The rhythm is always the same. The timing never varies. The sound never overlaps or accelerates. As the drumbeats continue, the shadows among the oaks become more active. They stretch and coil along the ridge, sliding across roots and stone in patterns that loosely align with the rhythm. The movement feels coordinated, as though responding to the beats rather than caused by them. Still, no source is ever seen. Despite the unusual activity, fear remains rare. Most visitors describe a sense of solemn focus rather than alarm. The drumbeats feel ceremonial, grounding rather than threatening. The shadows feel observant, not aggressive. The watchtower itself remains silent, standing as a fixed point amid shifting elements. Those who linger often notice a change in perception. Time feels slower. Thoughts quiet. Attention narrows to sound, shadow, and breath. The steady rhythm encourages stillness, as if inviting observers to pause rather than move on. Some believe the oaks play a role. Old trees are known to transmit vibration through extensive root systems. Wind passing through heavy branches can create low, rhythmic tones under certain conditions. The ridge itself may act as a natural amplifier, shaping sound in subtle ways. Others believe the land remembers. That long before the watchtower was built, the ridge served as a gathering place. That rhythm once guided movement, ceremony, or communication across the valley. The drumbeats may echo patterns embedded into the landscape rather than events tied to a specific time. As night deepens, the sound fades. The drumbeats grow softer, spacing out until they disappear entirely. The shadows settle back into stillness beneath the oaks. The valley becomes quiet once more, filled only with natural night sounds. By morning, Hollow Oak Watchtower appears unchanged. The oaks stand motionless. Shadows retreat into ordinary shapes. The valley stretches wide and silent. There is no sign of movement or sound left behind. Yet those who leave often carry the rhythm with them. A memory of steady beats echoing across open land. Of shadows that seem to move with intention. Of a place where the boundary between natural and unnatural felt thin but calm. Hollow Oak Watchtower does not announce itself. It waits on its ridge, surrounded by ancient trees and open sky. When conditions align, it reveals subtle motion and distant sound, not as a warning, but as an invitation to observe. Among twisting shadows and fading drumbeats, the watchtower continues its quiet vigil, overlooking a valley shaped by time, memory, and rhythms that rise only when the land decides to remember them. Black Pine Tower stands at the end of a narrow forest route where tall pine trees grow so close together that their trunks form a natural tunnel. The path leading upward is long and shaded, with needles carpeting the ground and muffling every step. Light filters through in thin strands, breaking apart as it passes between branches and disappears into shadow. The forest feels enclosed from the moment the path begins. Pines rise straight and uniform, their dark bark absorbing much of the daylight. The air is cooler here, heavy with the scent of resin and damp earth. Wind moves high above, stirring the canopy, but below it remains strangely still. As visitors walk deeper along the path, the tunnel effect becomes more pronounced. The trees lean inward slightly, narrowing the sky overhead until it appears as a pale ribbon. Sound changes. Footsteps seem distant. Breathing feels louder than it should. The forest gives the impression of closing around those who pass through. Movement begins to appear between the trunks. At first, it is easy to dismiss. A momentary distortion where light should fall evenly. But then the shapes repeat, appearing again and again in the same spaces. Upright forms glide slowly between the trees, never stepping fully into the path, never approaching directly. These figures remain partially hidden, their outlines blurred by shadow and distance. They seem tall and narrow, echoing the shape of the pines themselves. When watched closely, they fade. When attention drifts, they return, repositioned slightly farther along the tunnel. Visitors often feel the sensation before fully understanding what they are seeing. Cold fingers brush lightly against an arm. The sensation feels intentional, as if marking presence rather than seeking reaction. Turning reveals only trees. The figures remain between trunks, just outside clear view. The path continues upward, unchanged, as though nothing unusual has occurred. As the ascent continues, the touches repeat. Always brief. Always cold. When visitors stop walking, the sensation fades. When movement resumes, it returns. The tower becomes visible only near the end of the path. Black Pine Tower rises from a small clearing where the trees finally part. Built of stone and timber, it stands tall and weathered, its surface darkened by years of exposure. Narrow openings line its upper levels, and the structure feels older than it appears, as though it has absorbed the stillness of the forest around it. Approaching the tower brings another shift in atmosphere. The air grows colder. The forest behind seems to recede, its sounds dimming further. Figures continue to appear between the trees at the edge of the clearing. They do not follow into the open space. They remain among the pines, watching from a distance, their forms blending seamlessly with trunk and shadow. Inside the tower, the temperature drops noticeably. Stone walls hold the cold, and moisture clings faintly to the air. Here, the sensation of touch becomes more frequent. Cold fingers brush shoulders, pass lightly across the back of the neck, or graze the upper arm when moving past a wall or stair. The contact remains careful and brief, never startling enough to cause panic, yet persistent enough to be undeniable. Despite the closeness of these sensations, the atmosphere does not feel aggressive. The figures outside remain distant. The touches inside never escalate. Everything feels controlled, measured, as if governed by an unspoken rule of restraint. Black Pine Tower was constructed decades ago as a lookout, positioned to observe movement through the forested valley below. Those stationed here spent long hours alone, surrounded by trees that limited visibility and sound. Records describe isolation, quiet vigilance, and long periods of waiting broken only by weather and shadow. The forest itself seems to participate, guiding visitors through its tunnel with deliberate stillness. Those believe the experiences reported today reflect that history. Some believe the experiences reported today reflect that history. Those who pause inside the tower notice the activity slow. The touches fade. The interior grows quiet, balanced. Outside, the figures remain among the pines, motionless and indistinct. Movement resumes. The sensations return gently. Cold fingers brush past once more. The figures shift subtly between trunks. The forest appears responsive, not reactive, acknowledging motion without interference. Attempts to document the phenomena have produced little clarity. Photographs capture trees and shadow without clear form. Video footage shows shifting light between trunks. Audio recordings reveal only ambient forest sounds, unchanged by the experience. Scientific explanations suggest temperature differences, low light conditions, and sensory isolation can heighten perception. These factors explain some elements, but not the consistency or precision of the reported touches. Leaving Black Pine Tower brings gradual relief. As visitors descend the path, the tunnel begins to widen. Light returns in fuller patches. Sound grows clearer. The cold sensation fades, and the feeling of contact stops without notice. Looking back, the tower stands quietly in its clearing. Framed by pines that no longer seem to lean inward. No figures move between the trunks. The forest appears ordinary once more. Yet those who have walked the tunnel remember it clearly. The shapes between trees. The cold fingers brushing past. The sense of being accompanied without company. Black Pine Tower remains open to those willing to make the climb. It offers silence, shade, and long views over forested land. And along the path where pine trees form a tunnel, the forest sometimes reaches out lightly, allowing figures to appear once more between trunks, and cold fingers to brush past, reminding visitors that some places notice those who pass through them. Ghostlight Tower rises from a narrow ridge where stone meets open sky, its silhouette visible from miles away. The structure is tall and slender, built from dark stone that absorbs light during the day and seems to release it slowly after sunset. A long exterior staircase wraps upward around the tower, connecting a series of open platforms that circle the structure at different heights. From below, the climb looks manageable. From the first step, it feels anything but simple. During daylight hours, the tower appears quiet and empty. Wind moves freely across the ridge, carrying distant sounds from the valley far below. The stone steps are worn smooth by time, their edges softened by countless ascents and descents. No signs mark the tower's history. No plaques explain its purpose. It simply stands, watching. As visitors begin the climb, the world below feels immediately farther away. Each step upward narrows focus, drawing attention inward. The air cools noticeably, even on warm days. Sound changes, becoming sharper and more isolated. Footsteps echo briefly, then vanish, swallowed by stone and height. Many climbers report a subtle sensation of being accompanied. It begins as awareness rather than fear. A feeling that movement is being observed. Pausing on the stairs often intensifies this sensation. Some describe the sense of someone standing just out of sight below the curve of the steps. Turning around reveals nothing, yet the feeling remains, patient and steady. As evening approaches, Ghostlight Tower reveals its most unusual feature. Lanterns appear along the staircase, floating just above the steps. They glow with a soft, steady light, illuminating the stone without revealing any visible source. There are no hooks, no chains, no hands holding them. They hover in place or drift slowly upward, matching the pace of those climbing nearby. Their motion feels deliberate, controlled. Some remain still when approached. Others glide gently ahead, lighting the next turn in the staircase. Visitors often follow without thinking, drawn forward by the calm glow. As the climb continues, platforms come into view. These circular landings extend outward from the tower, offering space to rest and observe the landscape below. It is on these platforms that figures are most often seen. They stand silently near the edges, facing outward, their forms pale against the dark stone and fading sky. The figures do not move. They do not turn their heads or shift their weight. They stand with an unnatural stillness, as if fixed in place. Their outlines remain soft, difficult to focus on directly. Visitors often mistake the figures for other climbers at first. Only after noticing the silence does concern set in. No footsteps accompany them. No breath fogs the air. When attention drifts for even a moment, the figures vanish, leaving the platform empty. Mist often gathers around Ghostlight Tower as night falls. It rises from the valley below, curling around the structure and drifting across the stairs and platforms. Within this mist, visitors report seeing pale faces appear briefly, suspended in the air before fading again. The faces show no clear expression. They appear close, then dissolve instantly, leaving behind only cool air and lingering unease. The faces do not linger long enough to study. They emerge and vanish in seconds, often at the edge of vision. Those who try to focus directly on them find only mist. Those who look away sometimes glimpse them again moments later, closer than before. Soft murmurs drift upward through the tower, carried by wind that seems to move in circles rather than straight lines. The sounds do not form words. They feel like fragments of conversation, pauses without speech, breath without voice. Despite these experiences, Ghostlight Tower does not feel aggressive. There is no sense of being chased. No sudden movements. Everything unfolds slowly. The lanterns remain calm. The faces appear briefly, then retreat. Historical records of Ghostlight Tower are limited. Some suggest it served as a signal tower, guiding travelers through mountain passes with light. Others believe it functioned as an observation post, watching weather patterns and distant movement. At some point, its original purpose was abandoned, but the structure remained. Local belief suggests the tower never stopped its work. According to long-held stories, routine outlasted function. Lanterns continue to light the way. Figures continue to stand watch. The tower remembers movement and repeats it, responding to those who climb rather than initiating action itself. Visitors who reach the highest platform often describe the strongest sensations. The presence felt during the climb becomes more pronounced, as if gathering behind them. Standing at the top, some feel a gentle pressure at their back, urging them to step forward, not off the edge, but into the moment itself. Those who step away from the railing often feel immediate relief, as though balance has been restored. One visitor described pausing midway up the tower at dusk. Lanterns floated past him, rising silently. On the platform above, a figure stood motionless, facing the mist. As the visitor climbed closer, the figure faded, replaced by a pale face that appeared briefly in the air, then vanished. The lanterns continued upward, unaffected. Another account tells of a group who climbed together at night. They saw lanterns lighting the stairs ahead, and figures standing on multiple platforms. Each person described feeling watched, yet none felt threatened. They descended quietly, guided by the same lanterns, which drifted downward as they left. By dawn, Ghostlight Tower returns to stillness. Lanterns vanish with the mist. Platforms stand empty. The staircase reflects only natural light. The air warms, and sound returns to normal. The tower appears unchanged, solid and silent against the sky. Those who leave often carry a lingering impression. Not fear, but attentiveness. That it offers guidance without instruction and observation without judgment. Ghostlight Tower remains where it has always stood, rising above the ridge, waiting. When mist gathers and night falls, lanterns float along the stairs. Figures stand silently on platforms. And pale faces appear briefly before fading away. The tower does not call out. It does not explain itself. It simply continues, holding its place between earth and sky, illuminating the climb for those who choose to ascend, then letting them go, carrying the memory of ghostlight with them long after they descend. Ashwood Watchtower rises from a clearing of pale earth and scattered stone. Its frame built from dark timber and weathered metal. By day, the structure appears quiet and restrained, standing tall above the surrounding forest without drawing attention to itself. Sunlight passes easily through open railings and gaps in the walls, revealing a place shaped for observation rather than shelter. The path leading to the tower is narrow but well worn, suggesting frequent use long ago. Wooden steps climb steadily upward, wrapping around the central support in a careful spiral. Each stair bears the marks of time, edges rounded by countless footsteps that no longer come. The platforms above sit open to the sky, their planks faded and smooth. During daylight hours, Ashwood Watchtower feels dormant. Wind moves through it freely, producing gentle creaks and low tones that feel natural and expected. The stairs respond quietly to weight, and the platforms remain still beneath open air. Nothing about the structure suggests urgency or activity. The surrounding forest contributes to the stillness. Trees stand close, their branches filtering sound and light. Even birds seem cautious near the tower, their calls brief and distant. Visitors often describe the area as unusually calm, as if the watchtower absorbs sound rather than reflecting it. As evening approaches, the atmosphere begins to shift. Shadows stretch across the clearing, and the forest darkens more quickly than expected. The tower takes on a heavier presence, its height emphasized by the fading light. The stairs grow dim, their curves harder to follow with the eye. Night arrives gradually, settling over Ashwood Watchtower like a held breath. Moonlight outlines the structure, catching on railings and edges of planks. The platforms appear suspended in darkness, hovering between trees and sky. The forest beyond fades into a dense wall of shadow. It is after nightfall that movement begins. Shadows glide along the staircases, separating from the forms that should create them. Observers often notice the shadows first from the corner of their vision. A dark shape passes along the stairs. A movement where none should be. When attention turns directly toward them, the shadows slow or merge back into the structure, becoming indistinguishable from ordinary darkness. The shadows follow the architecture precisely. They round corners, pause briefly at landings, then continue. Alongside the shadows, sound returns to the tower. Soft footsteps echo across the wooden platforms, clear but restrained. The sound carries the distinct rhythm of walking, steady and measured. Each step produces a gentle response from the planks, then fades into silence. These footsteps do not rush. They move at a consistent pace, crossing platforms and transitioning onto stairs with subtle changes in tone. The echo travels farther at night, lingering just long enough to be recognized before dissolving. When listeners stop moving, the footsteps often continue briefly, then pause as well. The effect creates a sense of shared space, as though movement within the tower is synchronized. Starting to walk again often brings the sound back, matching pace without overtaking. Turning to look reveals empty stairs and platforms. The footsteps return, repeating their quiet pattern without visible source. Historical records indicate Ashwood Watchtower was staffed for many years as a lookout. Watchers climbed the stairs regularly, moving between platforms to monitor the forest and surrounding land. The tower was active at all hours, especially at night when visibility was greatest and danger harder to detect. When the watchtower was decommissioned, the staff left, but the structure remained. Equipment was removed, and the area was allowed to return to quiet use. Over time, the tower became a landmark rather than a workplace, its purpose slowly fading from daily life. Some believe the nighttime activity reflects this history of routine. The shadows glide where watchers once climbed. The footsteps echo patterns shaped by duty and repetition. The tower appears to remember movement even after presence has gone. Visitors often describe a heightened sense of awareness inside the tower at night. The feeling is not fear, but attentiveness, as though the space expects observation. The stairs feel active, the platforms alert. The forest beyond seems to listen. Sound behaves differently within the structure after dark. Wind noise softens, allowing footsteps to stand out clearly. The wooden planks amplify subtle movement, making even imagined sound feel plausible. Yet the consistency of reports suggests something more than imagination alone. Those who linger often notice the activity follows a pattern. Shadows appear first, then footsteps. The sequence repeats without variation, never escalating, never resolving. The tower feels caught in a loop, replaying fragments of its former role. Time perception can shift during these moments. Minutes pass quickly while waiting for movement. Silence stretches longer between sounds. The repetition draws focus inward, making it easy to lose track of duration. As the night deepens, activity begins to fade. Shadows glide more slowly, appearing less often. Footsteps become softer, spaced farther apart. The tower gradually settles, as if completing a cycle. By the hours before dawn, Ashwood Watchtower returns to near stillness. The platforms rest quietly beneath pale light. The forest begins to stir again, reintroducing ordinary sound. At sunrise, the watchtower looks unchanged. The wooden steps show no new marks. Platforms remain empty. The shadows are gone, replaced by clear lines and open air. The idea of nighttime movement feels distant, though the memory remains vivid. Officials describe the tower as structurally sound but unnecessary to access regularly. There are no warnings posted about sounds or shadows, only notices about weather and safety. Visitors are free to climb, though few choose to do so after dark. Those who have experienced Ashwood Watchtower at night often leave with a quiet certainty. The memory of shadows gliding along staircases. The echo of footsteps across empty platforms. The sense that the tower becomes active not with life, but with routine. Ashwood Watchtower does not announce its presence or demand attention. By day, it stands silent and unremarkable. By night, it remembers movement, allowing shadows to glide and footsteps to echo where they once belonged. When morning returns, everything settles back into stillness. The forest resumes its normal rhythm. The tower waits, unchanged, holding patterns shaped long ago, ready to repeat them again when darkness falls and the world grows quiet enough to listen. Widowmaker Tower rises from a rocky escarpment where the land narrows and the wind rarely rests. The structure is tall and imposing, built from stone blocks darkened by age and exposure. A single balcony wraps around its upper section, open to the air and overlooking a wide expanse of uneven ground below. From a distance, the tower appears abandoned, yet never entirely empty. The name carries a heavy history. Records tied to the tower speak of repeated tragedies over many years. Accidents during construction. Falls during maintenance. Sudden disappearances that left behind unanswered questions. Each event added to the tower's reputation, until it became known less for its purpose and more for the losses associated with it. During daylight, Widowmaker Tower feels stark and exposed. The wind presses against the stone, moving freely across the balcony and through narrow openings in the walls. Inside, the air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of damp stone. Footsteps echo sharply, then fade, leaving behind an uneasy quiet. The balcony offers a commanding view. From its edge, the surrounding landscape stretches outward in muted colors. Hills, sparse vegetation, and distant paths lie open beneath the sky. The height creates a sense of separation, as though the tower exists slightly apart from the world below. As evening approaches, the atmosphere begins to shift. Light drains slowly from the stone, and shadows deepen along the tower's exterior. The wind softens, becoming less chaotic and more deliberate. Sounds from the ground below grow faint, replaced by a growing sense of stillness. It is after nightfall that the most unsettling activity occurs. Figures rise along the balcony, emerging from shadow without sound. They appear gradually, their forms taking shape against the stone railing. Human in outline but indistinct in detail, they stand upright, facing outward, as if watching the land below. These figures do not climb or approach. They simply rise into view, as though lifting themselves from the structure itself. Their movements are slow and controlled, never abrupt. Once fully visible, they remain still for several moments before beginning to pace. The pacing follows the curve of the balcony. Each figure moves with measured steps, tracing familiar paths along the railing. They stop briefly at certain points, then continue on. Their pace is steady, neither hurried nor hesitant, suggesting routine rather than confusion. When observed directly, the figures often fade. They thin into the darkness, blending with shadow and stone until nothing remains. At times, another figure appears moments later in a nearby position, continuing the same motion as if uninterrupted. Alongside the visual sightings come the sounds. Distant cries drift upward toward the tower, carried faintly on the night air. The sound is low and uneven, rising and falling without forming clear words. It feels far away, yet persistent enough to be unmistakable. Interwoven with the cries are whispers. Soft and fragmented, they echo briefly within the tower before dissolving into silence. The whispers never sound close. They remain just beyond reach, as though traveling along the outer walls rather than within the space itself. These sounds often appear without warning. They do not correspond directly with the movement of the figures. Cries may drift through the air when the balcony is empty. Whispers may rise while the figures stand motionless. The lack of clear connection adds to the unease. Researchers studying the site have proposed explanations rooted in environment. Wind moving across the tower's height can carry distant sounds upward. Air pressure changes can produce tones resembling voices. Shadows cast by uneven stone and railing may create illusions of movement under low light. Yet these explanations fail to address the patterns reported. The figures appear only at night. They favor the balcony consistently. The pacing follows the same routes. The cries and whispers repeat under similar conditions, regardless of weather or season. Visitors often describe a sense of emotional weight. Not fear of immediate danger, but awareness of loss tied to the structure. The sounds feel expressive rather than random. The figures feel purposeful rather than lost. The tower seems to hold memory rather than menace. Those who remain inside the tower during the night report heightened sensitivity. Every sound feels amplified. The absence of light sharpens perception. Breathing becomes noticeable. Time feels stretched, measured not by clocks but by intervals of silence and sound. Despite the tower's reputation, no recent harm has been reported. No one has been touched. No one has been chased. The figures do not approach observers. The cries do not escalate. Widowmaker Tower allows presence without confrontation. Some believe the tower retains the imprint of repeated tragedy. That each loss added tension to the place, layering emotion into stone and air. Over time, these layers may surface as movement and sound, not as individual identities, but as echoes of circumstance. Others believe the balcony itself is central. A place of vigilance, exposure, and risk. Years of pacing, watching, and waiting may have shaped the space, leaving behind patterns that continue without awareness of their origin. As night deepens, the activity slowly fades. The figures appear less frequently, rising only briefly before dissolving. The cries grow softer, carried farther away by shifting air. The whispers thin into indistinct sound, then disappear entirely. By early morning, the tower returns to stillness. Sunlight reveals empty stone, silent railing, and an unoccupied balcony. The view below remains unchanged. No trace of the night's activity remains. Yet those who leave often carry a lasting impression. Not of terror, but of gravity. The feeling that the tower remembers what happened within its walls. That repetition and loss shaped it as much as stone and mortar. Widowmaker Tower does not seek attention. It does not warn or threaten. It stands where it always has, exposed to sky and wind. When darkness falls and sound carries differently, it reveals subtle movement and distant voices, reminders of a past marked by risk and endurance. Along its balcony, figures rise and pace without sound. Through the air, cries and whispers drift softly. And when morning comes, the tower releases its hold, standing silent once more. A solitary structure shaped by history, memory, and the quiet persistence of echoes that refuse to fully fade. Misty Pines Watchtower rises above a dense forest of tall pines where the air remains cool even during daylight. The structure stands on a rocky rise, surrounded on all sides by straight, narrow trunks that stretch upward and fade into canopy. By day, the tower appears functional and quiet, a simple platform of wood and metal built for observation. By night, it becomes something else entirely. As evening settles, fog rolls in through the forest with steady patience. It drifts between the trees in long, pale streams, wrapping around trunks and spilling across the ground. The fog does not rush. It moves with intention, climbing slowly toward the watchtower as though drawn to its height. Sound changes as the fog thickens. Wind softens. Insects fall quiet. Footsteps on the path leading up to the tower become muted, swallowed by needles and damp soil. The forest feels sealed off, distant from the rest of the world. Climbing the final steps toward Misty Pine's watchtower brings an immediate shift in temperature. The air grows colder, heavier. Moisture clings to skin and clothing, leaving everything faintly damp. Visibility shortens, and the tower platforms appear and disappear as fog drifts across them. Once on the platform, the forest below is barely visible. Pines fade into pale silhouettes, their tops dissolving into mist. The watchtower creaks softly under weight, though no wind is strong enough to explain the sound. The structure feels occupied by quiet, as if it remembers voices that once stood here. It is within this stillness that movement begins. Figures glide silently across the platforms, emerging from the fog without warning. They do not walk. They move smoothly, as if carried by the mist itself. Their shapes are human in outline but lack clear detail, their edges blurred by fog that refuses to thin around them. These figures pass through the open spaces of the tower without disturbing anything. Floorboards do not react. Railings do not shift. They glide past support beams and stairs, never colliding, never acknowledging one another. Their motion is calm and deliberate, following routes that suggest routine rather than chance. Visitors often notice the sensation of touch before fully registering the figures. A cool brush passes along an arm. Fingers graze a shoulder or the back of the hand. The contact is light and brief, yet unmistakably intentional. It does not resemble wind or fabric. It feels precise, placed, as if marking presence rather than seeking attention. Turning reveals nothing behind. The fog drifts lazily across the platform. The figures continue gliding at a distance, unchanged by reaction. Yet the chill from the contact lingers, spreading slowly before fading. As time passes on the platform, the sensations repeat. Always gentle. Always cold. The touches occur most often near the edges, where the fog is thickest and the forest below disappears entirely. When visitors stand still, the touches fade. When movement resumes, they return. Misty Pine's watchtower was built decades ago as a lookout for fire and weather activity. Those stationed here spent long hours alone, surrounded by fog and forest, watching for distant signs that rarely came. Records describe isolation, long nights, and reliance on sound and instinct when visibility failed. Some believe the figures reflect that history. Shapes continuing familiar patrols across platforms once walked by others. Touches marking presence in a place shaped by vigilance and waiting. The fog seems to preserve this rhythm, carrying it forward night after night. Despite the unsettling nature of the experience, panic rarely sets in. The atmosphere feels controlled, restrained. Nothing rushes. Nothing reaches out forcefully. The figures maintain distance. The touches remain light and brief. Those who pause and remain still notice a subtle change. The figures slow or become less distinct. The sensation of touch fades completely. The platform feels balanced, as if responding to stillness with quiet restraint. When movement resumes, the activity returns gently. The watchtower seems aware, but not reactive, acknowledging presence without interference. Attempts to document the phenomena have produced limited clarity. Photographs show fog-filled platforms and indistinct shapes that resist focus. Video footage captures drifting mist and subtle movement that cannot be clearly defined. Audio recordings reveal only ambient forest sounds and the occasional creak of wood. Scientific explanations suggest moisture density, low light conditions, and sensory isolation heighten perception. These factors explain parts of the experience, but not its consistency or timing. As the night deepens, fog thickens further, closing off views entirely. The figures appear closer together now, gliding more slowly, as if nearing the end of their circuit. The touches become less frequent, then stop altogether. Gradually, the figures thin and dissolve into mist. One by one, they fade without transition, leaving the platforms empty. The fog begins to lift slightly, loosening its hold on the structure. By early morning, Misty Pine's watchtower appears ordinary once more. Fog lingers among the trees, but the platforms are empty. No sensation follows movement. Those who descend before dawn often feel a quiet sense of release. The forest opens gradually as the fog thins. Sound returns. The air warms slightly with each step downward. Looking back, the watchtower stands silent above the trees, unchanged and still. Nothing suggests what occurred during the night. Yet those who stood on its platforms remember clearly. The figures gliding silently through fog. The unseen hands brushing lightly against skin. The feeling of being observed in a place built to observe others. Misty Pine's watchtower remains open to visitors seeking views and solitude. By day, it offers quiet scenery and open sky. And when fog rolls through the tall pines at night, the tower sometimes remembers its purpose. Allowing figures to glide once more across its platforms. And unseen hands to brush past. Reminding visitors that some places never truly stop watching. Blackroot Watchtower stands on a wooded rise where the forest thins just enough to reveal the sky. Unlike the stone towers found elsewhere in the range, this structure is built almost entirely of timber. By day, the wood appears gray and worn. By night, under moonlight, it turns almost black, absorbing light until the tower feels less built than grown from shadow. A narrow path leads to the watchtower, winding through dense trees whose roots twist above the soil like veins. The forest grows quieter the closer one gets. Birds retreat. Insects fall silent. Even the wind seems restrained, slipping between branches rather than moving through them freely. Visitors often notice the stillness before they see the tower itself. The watchtower rises above the treetops, its upper platform just visible through gaps in the canopy. Wooden steps spiral upward along one side, creaking softly underfoot. The structure feels old, but stable, as if it has learned how to endure. No signs mark its purpose. No records clearly explain why it was built here, far from settlements and roads. As daylight fades, the transformation begins. Moonlight settles over the forest, and the watchtower darkens further, its wood taking on a deep, almost root-like tone. Shadows cling to the planks, filling every groove and seam. The tower no longer reflects light. It seems to hold it. The surrounding trees appear slightly lighter by comparison, making the structure feel hollow and dense at the same time. It is during this hour that figures are first seen. They emerge briefly near the base of the tower or along the edge of the trees. Tall shapes, indistinct and quiet, forming just long enough to be noticed. They do not move toward the tower or away from it. They simply appear, pause, and vanish, dissolving back into the darkness without sound or motion. Those who witness the figures often describe a strange calm accompanying the sight. The experience feels familiar, as if the land itself is repeating something it has done many times before. Looking directly at the shapes causes them to fade more quickly, while seeing them out of the corner of the eye allows them to linger a moment longer. As night deepens, sound returns in an unexpected way. Faint chanting drifts through the trees, carried on the wind in low, steady waves. The sound is not loud and not clearly formed. It does not resemble speech, but rather layered tones that rise and fall together. The chanting seems distant and close at the same time, moving through the forest rather than across it. Visitors often stop walking when they hear it, unsure whether the sound is real. Some hear it clearly. Others feel it more than hear it, a vibration that settles in the chest and lingers. Recording devices rarely capture anything unusual, producing only the sound of wind where listeners insist the chanting was present. The chanting does not grow louder as one approaches the tower. It remains consistent, circling rather than guiding. It feels connected to the structure without originating from it, as if the tower and forest share the sound between them. Those who climb the wooden steps at night report heightened sensations. Each step feels heavier than expected. The wood creaks softly, yet the sound does not echo. Instead, it seems absorbed into the tower itself. Halfway up, many climbers describe the feeling of being watched, not from above or below, but from within the structure. The sensation is not threatening, but attentive. Figures sometimes appear on the platform at the top. They stand near the railing, upright and still, their outlines pale against the dark wood and open sky. When lanterns or flashlights are raised toward them, the figures blur and vanish, leaving the platform empty. Lowering the light sometimes causes them to reappear moments later, standing in a slightly different position, as though the act of observation itself disrupts them. The chanting often becomes clearer at the top of the tower. Wind moves more freely here, carrying sound across the treetops. The tones seem to rise from below, travel upward through the structure, then disperse into the sky. Some visitors describe the feeling that the tower is acting as a channel, focusing the sound rather than producing it. Historical references to Blackroot Watchtower are minimal. Old forestry maps note its location, but offer no explanation for its construction. A few scattered records mention watchkeepers assigned to remote posts, tasked with observing weather and movement through the forest. No detailed logs remain. No final entries explain when the tower was abandoned. Local belief suggests the watchtower never stopped serving its role. According to long-held stories, it was built to listen rather than signal. The forest around it was once denser, darker. And the tower was meant to stand as a point of attention. A place where sound and movement could be felt before being seen. Over time, the watchers left. But the structure remained, holding the habit of observation. Visitors who stay too long often describe subtle disorientation. Time feels stretched. The forest below seems farther away than it should be. The chanting becomes less noticeable, not because it fades, but because it blends into awareness itself. Those who descend usually do so quietly, guided by instinct rather than urgency. One visitor described standing on the platform under a full moon. The wood beneath his feet appeared almost black, merging with shadow. The chanting drifted steadily through the trees. A figure stood near the railing for several seconds before dissolving into the night. The visitor felt no fear, only the sense that something had been completed. Another account tells of a group who approached the tower after midnight. Figures appeared briefly among the trees, then vanished. The chanting followed them as they climbed, circling rather than leading. None of the group spoke until they had left the forest entirely. By dawn, Blackroot Watchtower returns to stillness. The wood lightens, revealing its weathered grain. The chanting disappears with the night wind. No figures remain near the structure. Birds return cautiously. The forest resumes its ordinary rhythm. Only those who have seen it under moonlight remember how figures appeared and vanished. How sound moved through the air without source. Blackroot Watchtower exists between presence and absence. Under the moon, the wood turns black, figures rise briefly from shadow. And chanting drifts through the forest like memory carried on the wind. It is not a place of warning or threat, but of attention. A reminder that some structures are built not just to see, but to listen. And when night falls and the forest grows quiet, Blackroot Watchtower listens still. Holding its place among the trees, waiting for the wind to speak again. Hollowbrook Tower stands at the edge of a shallow valley where stone rises sharply from soft ground. Where stone rises sharply from soft ground and water cuts a steady path through the land. And water cuts a steady path through the land. The tower itself is tall and narrow. The tower itself is tall and narrow, built from dark blocks worn smooth by time and weather. Built from dark blocks worn smooth by time and weather. At its base a creek winds quietly through reeds and stone. At its base a creek winds quietly through reeds and stone, wrapping around the foundation as if the structure was placed deliberately beside it. By day, the area feels calm and contained. Sunlight reflects off the water in shifting patterns, and the sound of the creek fills the space with a steady rhythm. The tower casts a long shadow across the banks, but nothing about the scene feels threatening. The bridges that cross the creek appear sturdy, their wooden planks aged but intact, connecting paths that once saw regular use. The tower was built as a lookout and waypoint, positioned to observe movement through the valley below. A staircase winds upward inside, while small platforms extend outward at different heights. From these points, watchers once surveyed the land and listened for changes carried on the wind or water. Over time, the tower was abandoned, its purpose slowly forgotten as paths shifted elsewhere. During daylight hours, Hollowbrook Tower feels dormant. Wind moves through gaps in the stone, creating soft tones that fade quickly. The bridges creak lightly as temperatures change, and the creek continues its quiet course. Visitors often describe the place as peaceful, shaped more by water than by stone. As evening approaches, subtle changes take hold. The light fades unevenly, leaving the valley in shadow while the upper portions of the tower remain briefly illuminated. The creek darkens first, reflecting less sky and more of the surrounding trees. Sound begins to travel farther, carrying small noises across the water. Night settles gently over Hollowbrook Tower. Moonlight outlines the structure against the darker hillside, while the valley below becomes a mix of silver highlights and deep shadow. The creek remains visible as a thin ribbon of movement, its sound steady and unbroken. It is along the water that figures are most often reported. They appear as upright shapes moving slowly along the creek banks, following the water's path with deliberate pace. Their forms resemble people, but details remain indistinct, defined more by motion than by features. These figures do not disturb the creek as they move. The movement feels purposeful, as though the figures are following a familiar route. They pause near bends in the creek or at points where the water passes closest to the tower's foundation. They never look toward the tower or the bridges, remaining absorbed in their path along the bank. The bridges become active after dark in a different way. Visitors hear footsteps crossing the wooden planks, clear and measured, accompanied by the soft creak of wood responding to weight. The sound travels from one end of a bridge to the other, then stops abruptly. When the bridges are inspected, they are empty. No movement can be seen, and the creek below flows undisturbed. Moments later, footsteps may sound again on another bridge, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, with no visible source. These sounds occur even when the air is still. Leaves do not move. Wind does not shift. Leaves do not move. Wind does not shift. The rhythm of the footsteps feels intentional, matching the pace of a calm walk rather than an accidental noise. Those standing near the tower at night often report a sense of being accompanied. The figures along the creek and the footsteps on the bridges create the impression of activity continuing independently of observation. The space feels occupied by movement rather than presence. Historical accounts suggest the creek played a central role in the tower's function. Watchers relied on the sound of water to orient themselves at night. And the bridges connected supply paths and observation routes. Movement along the water was constant during the tower's active years. Nighttime patrols were common. Lantern light reflected off the creek as guards crossed the bridges and walked the banks. These routines were repeated nightly, shaping how the space was used and remembered. Some believe the nighttime phenomena reflect these patterns. The figures along the water echo patrols that once followed the creek. The footsteps on the bridges repeat crossings made countless times. The tower appears to remember how the land moved around it. Visitors often describe the experience as restrained rather than threatening. The figures do not approach. The footsteps do not chase. Everything unfolds with distance and repetition, as if governed by an internal rhythm rather than reaction. Attempts to document the activity rarely succeed. Photographs show empty banks and still bridges. Audio recordings capture water and ambient sound, but footsteps often register faintly or not at all. The experiences seem tied to direct presence rather than evidence. Spending extended time near the tower at night can feel disorienting. The steady sound of the creek masks subtle changes in direction. Reflections shift constantly, and movement at the edge of vision becomes more noticeable. Many insist the figures feel distinct from illusion. At certain moments, multiple bridges seem active at once. Footsteps echo from different directions, overlapping briefly before falling silent. As the night progresses, activity gradually diminishes. Figures along the creek appear less often. Footsteps become spaced farther apart. The tower itself remains still, its stone walls absorbing sound and shadow. By the hours before dawn, Hollowbrook Tower returns to near silence. The bridges stand quiet. The creek continues its steady flow, unchanged and grounding. The valley feels emptied again. At first light, the tower looks exactly as it did before. The water runs clear. The bridges show no new marks. The ground along the banks is undisturbed. Any memory of nighttime movement feels distant, difficult to align with the calm scene. Officials describe Hollowbrook Tower as structurally stable but historically inactive. There are no warnings posted about sounds or sightings, only guidance about uneven terrain and weather. Visitors are free to explore, though few remain after dark. Those who have experienced Hollowbrook Tower at night often carry lingering impressions. The image of figures moving beside the water. The unmistakable sound of footsteps on empty bridges. The feeling that the tower and creek continue their routines whether or not anyone is there to witness them. When darkness settles, movement returns briefly along the creek and across the bridges, not to disturb the living, but to continue patterns that were never fully brought to an end. Blood Willow Watchtower stands on a narrow ridge where the land rises sharply above a winding valley. The structure is modest in size, built of stone and dark timber, its walls weathered smooth by years of wind and rain. From its base, the ground slopes unevenly into dense growth, and beyond that, the valley opens wide beneath shifting sky. Willow trees line the ridge on all sides. They grow in thick clusters, their trunks bent and darkened by constant moisture. Long branches trail downward, brushing against stone, soil, and one another. Even when the air is calm, the willows sway gently, their movement slow and uneven, as if responding to something beneath the surface rather than the wind alone. The watchtower was once used as a lookout. Its position offered clear views across the valley, allowing those stationed there to monitor movement, weather, and distant activity. Over time, its purpose faded, and the tower was left behind. The willows continued to grow, creeping closer year by year, their roots spreading around the foundation. During the day, Blood Willow Watchtower feels quiet but unsettled. Light filters through hanging branches, casting shifting shadows across the stone walls. The air carries a damp coolness, scented with wet bark and soil. Footsteps sound muted, absorbed by soft ground and fallen leaves. Even voices seem restrained, as if the space prefers silence. Leaves whisper softly, producing a constant, low sound that blends with the distant valley below. Standing still beneath them creates the impression of being surrounded by motion without direction. As afternoon fades, shadows gather quickly beneath the trees, thickening around exposed roots that rise and twist above the soil. It is among these roots that figures appear. They crouch low to the ground, partially hidden by tangled wood and trailing branches. Their shapes are small and indistinct, darker than the surrounding shadow. When observed directly, the figures do not move. Yet when attention drifts, their positions seem to change. A shape glimpsed beneath one tree may later appear closer to another. The movement is subtle and silent, never disturbing leaves or soil, never accompanied by sound. Visitors often describe a feeling of being watched from below. Not threatened, but noticed. The sensation grows stronger near the oldest willows, where roots are thickest and most exposed. Standing still beneath these trees heightens awareness, as if the ground itself is attentive. Night brings sound to Blood Willow Watchtower. Whispers drift through the air, weaving between branches and stone. They are low and indistinct, never forming clear words. Instead, they resemble fragments of conversation, overlapping and fading before meaning can settle. Alongside the whispers comes soft laughter. It is faint and brief, carrying a lightness that contrasts with the heavy air. The sound never rises sharply. The sound floats gently, then disappears, leaving behind a silence that feels slightly altered by its presence. These sounds seem tied to the willows. They are strongest beneath the hanging branches and weaken in open spaces near the tower. Stepping away from the trees often causes the whispers to fade, only to return when re-entering the shaded areas. Despite the unusual activity, fear is uncommon. Most visitors describe curiosity mixed with unease rather than panic. The figures do not approach. The sounds do not escalate. The watchtower and its surrounding trees feel occupied, but not hostile. Yet these explanations struggle to account for consistency. The figures appear only after dusk. The whispers and laughter follow similar patterns each night. The willows sway even when surrounding trees remain still. The willow's roots extend deep into soil shaped by years of human presence. Over time, impressions of routine and emotion may have settled into the environment itself. The crouching figures may reflect echoes of presence rather than distinct beings. Others suggest the watchtower plays a role. Years of solitary observation may have left a quiet imprint. Watching, waiting, listening. These actions, repeated over long periods, may have shaped how the space responds when darkness falls. Those who remain late into the night often report vivid dreams afterward. Dreams of standing beneath low branches. Of hearing voices without seeing faces. Of quiet companionship felt rather than spoken. Upon waking, many feel contemplative, as though the experience continued beneath conscious thought. As dawn approaches, activity fades. The figures among the roots vanish with retreating shadows. The whispers dissolve into birdsong and rustling leaves. The laughter disappears completely. Morning light reveals only trees, stone, and damp ground. Blood Willow Watchtower returns to stillness. The willows continue to sway gently, their branches brushing together in familiar patterns. Roots remain exposed and unmoving. The tower stands quietly among them, unchanged and watchful. Yet those who leave often carry a lingering impression. Not fear, but awareness. A sense that the ridge is not empty, even in silence. That presence does not always require form or voice. That memory can settle into land and grow alongside living roots. Blood Willow Watchtower does not demand belief or explanation. It offers subtle movement, quiet sound, and the feeling of being observed without judgment. Beneath swaying branches and among tangled roots, it remains a place where the boundary between absence and presence feels thin. In the soft whispers, the brief laughter, and the crouching shapes that fade with the night, the watchtower continues its quiet vigil. Holding what was left behind, and releasing it gently, one subtle moment at a time. Phantom Peak Tower stands at the crest of a steep mountain rise where the ground narrows and the sky feels closer than the land below. The climb toward it is long and exposed, with rocky paths and sparse vegetation shaped by wind and cold. Even before the tower comes into view, the atmosphere changes. Sound thins. Air cools. The mountain feels alert. The mountain feels alert. The tower itself is tall and angular, built of stone and metal anchored directly into the summit rock. A wide platform wraps around its upper level, offering open views in every direction. By day, the structure appears silent and functional, weathered but intact. By night, it becomes something far less ordinary. As dusk settles, the first anomaly appears. Lantern light blooms along the platform railings, one glow at a time. The light is warm and steady, floating at consistent height as if held carefully. No chains hang. No flames flicker. The lanterns illuminate sections of the platform without casting a visible source. They do not swing wildly or drift at random. Each lantern holds position, spacing itself evenly along the edge, outlining the platform with deliberate precision. The light reveals stone, metal, and open air, but no hands, no hooks, no explanation. As darkness deepens, movement begins below. Within the stairwells that spiral up through the tower, shapes start to rise. They emerge gradually, forming from shadow rather than stepping into view. They climb without sound, ascending through the central structure with smooth, continuous motion. They do not touch the steps. They do not disturb dust or echo against walls. Their outlines remain faint, human in shape but incomplete, as if assembled from dim light and absence. More figures follow, repeating the ascent. Visitors who watch the stairwells often feel a strange stillness take hold. The air feels heavier. Breathing becomes shallow without intention. The tower seems to contain the night rather than sit within it. Shadows cast by the lantern stretch across the platform, as expected. But others detach from the structure entirely. These shadows glide independently across the stone, slipping beneath railings and across open floor where no object stands to cast them. Some move parallel to the lanterns. Others cross paths, overlapping briefly before separating again. Their edges remain sharp and defined, darker than surrounding night, and completely unaffected by changes in light position. The shadows do not climb walls or rise upward. They remain bound to the surface of the platform, tracing routes that feel intentional rather than random. Despite the unsettling visuals, the atmosphere does not turn chaotic. Everything moves with restraint. The lanterns hold steady. The figures rise and fade in rhythm. The shadows glide without haste. Phantom Peak Tower was constructed as a lookout during a period when visibility from the summit was critical. Watchers spent long nights scanning distant ridges, relying on lantern light and shadow to interpret movement below. Records describe isolation, exposure, and hours of waiting broken only by brief moments of activity. Some believe the phenomena reflect those routines. Lanterns outlining familiar positions. Figures climbing stairwells once used by others. Shadows continuing movements learned long ago, separated from the structures that created them. Visitors who step onto the platform report a sensation of alignment, as if entering a process already underway. The lanterns illuminate just enough to guide movement without revealing detail beyond their glow. The figures pause their ascent. The shadows slow, gathering briefly near the center of the platform. The lanterns dim slightly, their glow softening without fading. The tower feels balanced, waiting. When movement resumes, the cycle continues. Figures rise once more along the stairwells. Attempts to document the experience have produced limited results. Photographs show illuminated platforms without visible sources. Video captures shapes moving within stairwells that vanish upon closer inspection. Audio recordings reveal only wind and distant ambient noise, unchanged by visual activity. Environmental explanations point to altitude, light distortion, and sensory isolation. These factors explain portions of the experience, but not the coordination or repetition. As the night progresses, activity reaches a quiet peak. Figures rise in steady intervals. Shadows move with confidence, tracing familiar paths across the stone. Without signal, the process begins to reverse. Figures slow their ascent, thinning before they reach the platform. Shadows lose cohesion, breaking apart and rejoining the structure beneath them. Lanterns dim one by one, their light retreating into darkness without flicker or sound. By the time night begins to loosen its hold on the summit, the platform is dark and empty. The stairwells show no movement. At dawn, Phantom Peak Tower appears unchanged. Sunlight reveals ordinary stone and metal. No lanterns remain. The mountain feels open again, exposed to wind and sky. Those who descend after witnessing the night often describe a lingering sense of precision. The memory feels structured rather than chaotic, as if the tower followed rules no longer written. Phantom Peak Tower remains accessible to those willing to climb. By day, it offers wide views and solitude. By night, it sometimes resumes a silent routine shaped by light, motion, and shadow. And when darkness settles at the summit, lanterns may once again line the platform without source. Figures may rise along the stairwells. Shadows may glide freely across stone. Not as a warning, and not as a threat, but as a reminder that some places remember how they were once used, and continue their work long after the need has faded. Darkwada Summit Tower stands at the highest point of the range, perched where stone gives way to open air and the horizon stretches thin. The climb to the summit is steep and exposed, a winding ascent carved into rock that feels older than any map. Even before the tower comes into view, visitors sense something different about the mountain. The air grows heavier. Sound dulls. Each step feels measured, as if the ground itself is paying attention. By day, the tower appears weathered but intact. Built of dark stone and reinforced with iron, it rises from the summit like an anchor driven into the peak. A wide platform encircles the upper level, bordered by a low wall that overlooks sheer drops on all sides. Stairs spiral upward from the mountainside, their edges worn smooth by time and weather. The structure feels solid, yet unsettled, as if it does not fully belong to the mountain beneath it. As evening approaches, Darkwada Summit Tower begins to change. Light fades faster at this elevation, and shadows stretch long across the stairs. The mountains surrounding the tower seem to darken unevenly, their ridges blurring as mist creeps upward from the valleys below. Wind moves in sudden shifts, carrying sound in fragments rather than flows. Footsteps echo briefly, then vanish entirely. It is after sunset that the tower earns its reputation. Ghostly lanterns appear along the stairs, floating just above the stone. They glow softly, steady and pale, casting light without flame or heat. No chains hold them. No hands guide them. They drift upward at a slow, deliberate pace. They illuminate each step ahead while leaving the surrounding darkness untouched. Visitors often follow the lanterns without realizing it, drawn by the calm certainty of their glow. The lights never rush. They pause when the climber pauses. They resume when movement continues. The sensation is not of being led, but of being accompanied. As the stairs near the summit, sound begins to return. Footsteps echo behind those climbing, matching their rhythm precisely. When they stop, the sound continues for a moment, then fades. Whispers drift through the air, layered and indistinct, brushing past like breath rather than voice. Occasionally, faint laughter rises, distant and gentle, never sharp or mocking, yet deeply unsettling in its quiet familiarity. The source of these sounds is never visible. Turning reveals empty steps and drifting lantern light. The sounds seem to belong to the tower itself, emerging from stone and air rather than any living presence. At the top, the platform opens wide. Figures rise silently along its edge, emerging from shadow as if lifted by the mountain itself. They stand upright and still, pale against the dark stone and open sky. Some appear close to the wall. Others stand farther back, evenly spaced, facing outward toward the endless drop below. They do not move. They do not acknowledge one another or those who arrive. Their presence feels complete, as though they have always been there and are only now becoming visible. Looking directly at the figures causes their outlines to soften, blending into mist until they seem barely present. Looking away allows them to reappear moments later, unchanged. Visitors often describe an overwhelming awareness on the platform. The feeling of being surrounded without being approached. The sense that every movement is noted. Fear arises slowly, not from threat, but from the realization that nothing here is accidental. Some report that the mountain itself begins to shift. Not violently, not suddenly, but subtly. The ground beneath feels angled slightly toward the edge, as if balance has changed. Steps feel easier in one direction than another. Standing still becomes difficult, as though the body is being gently encouraged to move forward. Those who resist often describe a sudden clarity, as if the mountain releases its hold. Lanterns drift across the platform, their light tracing slow arcs along the stone. One visitor described standing near the edge as a lantern floated past, its glow reflecting in the mist. A figure stood only a few steps away, facing the darkness beyond the wall. As laughter drifted faintly through the air, the ground beneath felt unsteady, subtly urging forward. The visitor stepped back instinctively, and the sensation faded immediately. Another account tells of a climber who reached the summit alone. Lanterns lined the stairs behind him, and footsteps followed until he stopped. On the platform, figures rose one by one along the edge, silent and pale. Whispers filled the air, circling rather than advancing. He remained still, breathing slowly. Until the sound softened and the lanterns dimmed. Historical records of Darkwada Summit Tower are incomplete and inconsistent. Old survey maps mark the summit, but offer little detail about the structure. Some notes reference watchkeepers assigned to observe weather and distant movement. Others mention signal lights that once burned through the night. At some point, the tower was abandoned, though no record explains why. Local belief suggests the tower was never meant to be empty. According. Long-held stories. The mountain. Figures. Lanterns. Sound. Movement. Despite its reputation as the most haunted of all, Darkwada Summit Tower does not feel aggressive. Nothing lunges. Nothing forces action. Everything unfolds slowly, deliberately, giving visitors time to choose awareness over panic. Those who remain calm often find the experience passing like a tide, intense but temporary. As night deepens, mist thickens around the summit. Figures become harder to distinguish, blending into shadow and cloud. Lanterns dim, their glow softening until it barely outlines the stairs. Footsteps and whispers fade into the wind. Laughter dissolves into silence. By dawn, the tower releases its hold. Lanterns vanish. Figures sink back into shadow. The ground feels steady once more. Morning light reveals the platform empty and the stairs ordinary. The mountains stand still, vast and quiet beneath the sky. Visitors descending at sunrise often feel conflicted. Relief mixes with a lingering sense of connection. Of being followed without threat. Of sound without source. Of a place that felt aware. Darkwata Summit Tower remains at the peak, unmoved by time or weather. When night falls, it awakens quietly. Figures rise along the platform. Lanterns float along the stairs. Sound follows those who climb. The tower does not call. It does not chase. It simply waits, balanced at the edge of stone and sky. Allowing the mountain to guide those who listen too closely. And releasing them again when the light returns. Thank you, my dear friend, for climbing with me tonight along the haunted mountain watchtowers of Colorado. These towers may seem quiet by day. But by night they are alive with shadows, whispers, and spirits that refuse to rest. If you ever wander up a mountain tower at night, and fog drifts across the platform, or shadows move along the staircases, or lanterns appear floating above the decks, remember this. Not every shadow is harmless. Not every platform is safe. And not every figure belongs to the world of the living. Step carefully. Keep your lanterns close. And may the spirits of the mountains leave you to descend safely. Until our next haunted journey, my dear friend.